The United States, despite the loud statements from the Trump administration, continued to supply weapons to Ukraine. This news has already caused quite a stir. However, as it turns out, it's not just about shells and missiles. Along with the continuation of deliveries under the agreement with the previous US administration and the willingness to sell us additional weapons, it has turned out that the F-16 supply program is also being implemented unofficially but quite effectively.
This kind of approach is the best way not to have to wait for what you have ordered.
Just recently, journalists managed to capture footage of yet another such delivery. The secret loading of disassembled fighter jets, which took place at a classified military airfield, has already caused a huge stir, as it essentially proved that the US remains willing to support our combat aviation. So what exactly was loaded onto that transport aircraft? How many planes were successfully transferred to Ukraine? How are they being used by the Air Force, and how regular are such deliveries? We'll tell you all about this right now in the new episode of Arsenal. In recent days, the world press has been abuzz with a real sensation. Contrary to Trump's statements, the US continues to supply F-16s to Ukraine. The latest proof is these images filmed at an American airbase in Arizona.
Here you can see the fuselage of an F-16 fighter jet, and in the photos presented you can spot at least 3 F-16s that are partially disassembled and wrapped in shrink film for transport in that very Antonov aircraft, which according to radar data was spotted during its flight to Poland, specifically to the airfield where military aid usually arrives. This proves that the United States has likely supplied Ukraine with 3 or even 4 F-16s.
Considering that the branded Antonov An-124 Ruslan from the Antonov Airlines fleet was used for delivery, there is no doubt as to whom the cargo belongs. At the same time, it is worth noting that indirect confirmation that the aircraft have indeed been handed over to Kyiv can also be found in statements made by Ukrainian President Zelensky. This is especially true considering that these statements appeared simultaneously with the photos on the internet.
Today, I also held a meeting on the development of our military aviation. First of all, regarding the Ukrainian F-16s, the aircraft that are already in Ukraine, the aircraft that will arrive in Ukraine in the near future, and the long-term deliveries, there were personnel decisions made to strengthen the management of military aviation. These decisions were made in the Ministry of Defense and in the General Staff. And now we are seeing some very good results. I want to thank everyone who is making efforts to help our military aviation develop.
Some details of this story were carefully outlined in a publication by the Warzone portal, from which the following picture emerges. An unnamed representative of the US Air Force essentially and reportedly admitted that these several decommissioned F-16s were transferred to Ukraine as part of the ongoing support for Europe's efforts to provide this type of fighter jet to further strengthen the Ukrainian armed forces.
In Aurora mode, this is for disassembly, so to speak. It's important, especially when carrying out combat missions, to have such components available, that is, aircraft that are not ready for operation but can be dismantled. Because after each combat mission, the planes sometimes return with damaged wings, damaged bodies, fuselages, and so on. And all of that needs to be patched up. You can't just solder it. So the optimal solution, for example, is to simply remove a damaged section of the fuselage or wing from another plane that's no longer airworthy, and then install it. These parts are truly interchangeable, practically down to the millimeter.
One of the nuances analysts point out is that these decommissioned aircraft were transferred with their power units and radar systems removed. In other words, these planes can only be used as donors for spare parts and cannot be restored to a condition suitable for combat use. But even so, Experts believe this is an extremely significant help for our pilots and aviation technicians.
Regarding the transfer of military equipment to us, even if it's in disassembled condition or let's say not ready for combat missions, I want to say a big thank you and enormous thank you to the American people, the American military and the American Congress.
At the same time, that unnamed representative of the US Air Force did not provide any further details in his comments to the war zone. But even from what has been stated, it is clear that these decommissioned F-16s were sent by the Americans either to the Ukrainian armed forces or to one of the European countries that is expected to transfer its F-16s to us in the future.
This approach is best because instead of waiting for something ordered, our engineering and technical staff with a sledgehammer and some ingenuity can make anything from whatever is available. That's why practically all of our planes are still flying. This kind of transfer, especially when it comes to aviation equipment, should definitely be welcomed.
The deliveries of disassembled fighter jets also coincided with statements from the Swedish side that preparations for Ukraine's SAAB radar aircraft, the ones with the dish above the fuselage area, proceeding according to the plan. Consequently, the transferred spare parts can be used to equip the maximum number of F-16s, which, once we have an airborne command post as part of a unified information system, will be able to carry out large-scale combat missions, making full use of all the advantages of Western technology.
High bandwidth operational communications equipment makes it possible to transmit images directly to the aircraft. On the tactical situation display, the pilot can see everything in the area where he is operating, where enemy aircraft are and where enemy anti-aircraft systems are located. All reconnaissance information is delivered to him on board almost in real time, and he carries out combat missions, not just relying on prompts from a ground-based guidance officer or guidance officer on a SAB 340 aircraft if one is used, but by seeing everything with his own eyes.
At the same time, the Warzone publication also notes that these decommissioned F-16s from the US were delivered to Europe on board a Ruslan aircraft wrapped in heat-resistant film, which in theory makes it more difficult to identify the aircraft. Analysts, however, suggest that in this case, F-16s in the Block 15 variant, previously used by the US National Guard for air defense missions, may have, for example, been allocated as donors for essential spare parts. At the same time, experts remind us that it is not worth relying solely on the F-16s, and based on the experience of supplying spare parts for Western fighter jets, Ukraine should apply this approach to Soviet equipment as well, and intensify our search for spare parts for our own MiGs and Sukhois.
We need to start gathering immediately, and wherever possible, MiG-29s, Su-25s, Su-24s, Su-27s and L-39s in any condition. That is even just so that later on we could, even a single fuselage could allow us, for example, to replace a section of the skin on an aircraft that is flying and carrying out combat missions. This is a very big, a huge support.
Did you like this video? Then be sure to give it a like and subscribe to our new Arsenal channel. The link is in the description below the video.
Russian air defense systems have shot down 176 HIMARS rockets, 27 Storm Shadow cruise missiles, and 483 unmanned aerial vehicles.
They report on the successful interception of projectiles. They claim that Western missiles are nothing compared to the capabilities of Russian air defense.
These days we're shooting down almost all the HIMARS rockets, but as for Storm Shadow, 1 out of 4 gets through.
However, that's just for the camera. In reality, the occupiers are afraid. They are terrified of Western weapons and their capabilities.
A year ago, we were afraid of the HIMARS over there. Now we're facing completely different problems, much more serious ones. Take those Storm Shadows, for example. They fly right into the base. They hit the first Storm Shadow, makes a hole in the wall, and then the next Storm Shadow flies into that exact same hole, hitting it with pinpoint accuracy.
The Russians have nothing to counter this. Most of their missiles were developed and produced back in the Soviet Union. The old ones have been modified in makeshift conditions and are inaccurate. The circular error probable for some of them is measured in kilometers. However, this doesn't stop the terrorist state from using them, striking residential buildings, cafes, and shopping centers. The collateral damage does not concern the Russians, just as it doesn't matter to them that women, the elderly, and children are caught in the strikes.
Kherson region, April. The Russians struck the village with devastating guided aerial bombs. Our valiant air defense, despite titanic efforts, unfortunately was not able to shoot down all the enemy missiles.
This is the church grounds. This is the church grounds. An aerial bomb landed here. 6 meters deep, 15 meters in diameter. This is all that remains of the church. This is what remains of the church.
But this will not happen again. And it's all thanks to the American AMRAAM missiles, which the US will purchase for Ukraine. 4 times faster than the speed of sound, they can shoot down planes and helicopters, bringing death to Ukrainians, even while still over enemy territory. AMRAAM is undeterred by snow or blizzards. They operate effectively in any kind of weather and are fully capable of independently finding and tracking their targets on their own. The AM-120 AMRAAM missile is a highly advanced American all-weather, medium-range, air-to-air guided missile. Its development began in the early 1980s, and in 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the missile was adopted by the US military. The AMRAAM is designed to engage enemy aerial targets beyond visual range, and according to its developers, after countless modifications, it is the most advanced missile in the world, proven in combat conditions. The number of operators of this missile confirms their words. Dozens of countries have the AMRAAM in their arsenals. To be precise, there are 33 such countries, including Ukraine. You heard that right. It turns out that Ukraine already has the AMRAAM in service.
We are constantly and regularly being supplied with these missiles for the advanced NASAMS air defense systems, which also use in particular the AIM-120 missile. From the very first days when attacks on our critical infrastructure began in the fall of last year, these missiles have been used with NASAMS.
The effectiveness of the missile in Ukraine has been highly praised by its own developers. According to their data, the AMRAAM has achieved a hit accuracy rate of over 90% in combat conditions in Ukraine.
If you think about all the cruise missiles, drones, and threats that Ukraine has faced, NASAMS, armed with AMRAAM, has proven its effectiveness in shooting them down at a rate of more than 90%. And that's taking into account the means that were already available, which are far from the capabilities offered in D3 and C8.
The results are impressive. However, that's not all. The fact is, when the missile is launched from a ground installation, its range is not that great. But an air launch is a completely different story. The AMRAAM, in its various modifications, is capable of engaging targets at distances ranging from 55 to 180 kilometers.
In fact, the missile can directly destroy an aircraft with its firepower, including with shrapnel, at a considerable distance.
As we mentioned earlier, the missile is capable of shooting down an enemy aircraft over hostile territory. At the same time, the aircraft launching the American missile does not risk entering the enemy air defense zone. The AMRAAM is highly maneuverable, and its speed of Mach 4 allows it to overtake even the fastest Russian aircraft. But the main advantage of the AM-120 is its guidance system. The AMRAAM uses a combination of inertial navigation. This means the missile can independently determine the coordinates and movement parameters of the target. The process is extremely complex, but we will try to explain everything in simple terms. When launching the missile, the pilot does not necessarily have to see the target. With the help of its active radar, the AMRAAM will find and lock onto it as it approaches. This allows the pilot to target and launch several missiles at multiple targets simultaneously. After that, the aircraft can perform evasive maneuvers and the missile will handle everything on its own. At the same time, it doesn't matter what the weather is like or what time of day it is. The AMRAAM is accurate under any conditions. The AIM-120 was developed for Western equipment. It can be carried by various modern American aircraft. However, Soviet aircraft are not quite suitable for it. There have been attempts to adapt the AMRAAM for Soviet technology, but were they successful? It's a mystery.
The main drawback of such adaptation for use with Soviet equipment is the need to use a so-called emulator. In this case, the missile is not actually connected to the aircraft's onboard system, but rather to a specific tablet that emulates the operation of a Western aviation platform's computer. As a result, the missile may have a number of limitations.
But that's not all that important, because the news about the transfer of AMRAAMs and American F-16 fighter jets is happening simultaneously, and most likely, the missiles will be carried by their native American aircraft. There are no exact dates, but military experts predict that both will be in Ukraine by the spring of next year. As for the number of missiles, that of course is being kept secret. Only the total value of the deal is known in $192 million. Basing their calculations on the announced cost, the Ukrainian military portal Defense Express tried to estimate the possible number of missiles. To do this, the experts used publicly available reports from the US Department of Defense. According to these reports, in the Pentagon's budget request for the 2024 fiscal year, the price of one AMRAAM is $1.37 million. But this price is for the United States Armed Forces themselves. These missiles are exported with price tags of $2 and $4 million. However, in this case, we are talking specifically about a direct contract between the Pentagon and the manufacturer. Therefore, it makes sense to base calculations on the price of $1.4 million. According to Defense Express's calculations, the volume of American aid to Ukraine would amount to about 140 missiles. We're talking about the AIM-120C8 version, which has a range of up to 160 kilometers. But this only concerns deliveries from the United States. And who said this isn't a purchase for their own armed forces? Meanwhile, Ukraine could receive missiles from stockpiles and possibly in greater quantities. And considering that the AMRAAM is in service in 33 countries, it's reasonable to expect several additional 100 missiles from them as well. One thing remains certain: Russian aircraft are doomed to be destroyed. And now, not only in the airspace over Ukraine or at airfields near the border, but also in the skies above what, just a year and a half ago, seemed to be such well-protected Russian territory. Find out what other weapons Ukrainian fighters can use to attack airfields and Russian aviation in our upcoming episodes. In the meantime, don't forget to like this video and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes of your favorite show, Arsenal.